our last speaker is Professor Bing Yu. I don't think I need to do a long introduction because everyone here knows Professor Bing for her work, which spans a lot of fields, including statistics, machine learning, data science, neuroscience, genomics. So today, Professor Yu is going to talk about adaptive wavelet distillation from neural networks. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the organizers to having me here. And so I welcome questions during the talk, so just interrupt me. And so what I want to talk here is really define like the most recent work on this line of interval machine learning. And I'd like to start a little earlier from the history of how we get where we are. So I think a lot of you probably know for trustworthy AI, and in general, interval machine learning is at the frontier, and EU has this, for 5 years now, data protection regulation really gives the right to explanation. So this is really make it like a customer can actually request the algorithm, say patient, for your algorithm to be interpretable. And just, these are the problems I have encountered. I was at the IPAM workshop, I think a couple of years ago, and CEO of a startup was talking to me about interval machine learning because FDA was asking her company to provide interpretable interpretation for her deep learning algorithms. Well, we work with biologists. We try to figure out like false order, third order interaction, different genes for making the fate of a cell. You will see an example from cosmology and also sentiment analysis from machine learning. And I think yours also started very well. In the earlier talk, I would call scientific machine learning, that I defined it. The term has been used, but that's my definition. It uses machine learning for scientific research to extract from data, discoveries, theory, and knowledge, and build scientific principles, especially like symmetry, things like that from physics in machine learning algorithms. And also we hope we do new science. So it iterates between the two steps. And we think the results should be subject to higher standards of scientific standards than usual machine learning standards. About 3 or 4 years ago, I have different people, Jamie, Chandon, Reza, and Carl, working on different aspects interval machine learning. And we finally decided that even within my group, we need to agree on what do we mean by interval machine learning. So that's what we came up with. The paper 2 years ago. We define interval machine learning as extraction relevant knowledge from machine learning model concerning relationship either containing data or learned by the model. Here we view knowledge as being relevant. So this is something we want to emphasize. If we provide insight for a particular audience, we're bringing human into this consideration. Interpretation is not for another machine, it's for some group of humans and to a chosen problem. The interpretation could be different if you use even the same machinery for different purposes. And there's a goal, which is to guide communication, actions, and discovery. So we want to really ground it to something more tangible than just like pretty high level qualitative. So we developed this predictive accuracy, descriptive accuracy, and relevancy paradigm to say you need people, you need a problem, and you need reality checks through predictive accuracy. Descriptive accuracy is kind of more qualitative. Even the 5 authors took us a long time to agree on a definition. So I won't get into detail to it because this is really about adaptive wavelets and just give you, that's mostly people think, right? You have decision trees, logistic regression, deep learning is the most black box we know. And the generic interpretability, people agree that you want sparse, you don't want too many complex models. And immutability is very important. It's a human can follow the algorithm and really know how the decision is made. Decision trees, small decisions are perfect for that. And decomposability, modularity. So what I would talk about is more domain-specific interval features. Credit score, right? We all have credit scores. It's a bunch of things about our financial behavior mixed into now it's meaningful. Fourier coefficients, physics, and wavelets, local field transform. So these things are very domain specific. And a lot of the machine learning work can really give new interpretable features later domain scientists will embrace and can use it and make it for their scientific work and validate it. And post-hoc interpretability, that's also what I'm discussing, is the model is already fitted. I'm not fitting the model. There's another aspect. How do you make the fitting interpretable? That's not what I'm talking about. It's about fitting model, how do you interpret? You can go by p-values for statistical significance, these global interval quantities, and you can also go to local level. And I think in scientific machine learning, relevance is the key, right? So the insights we get from these machine learning models have to correspond to facts about the real world. And the interpretation machine learning model need to be vetted and calibrated against trustworthy factual information. So this is not just for the fun of, oh, I can interpret it, but really this interpretation has to be vetted. So for the rest of the talk, I'll talk about a precursor to AWD. It's earlier work, a sequence of conference papers. Compared with other competitors, what we were able to do is give importance to group features who can study interactions. And then we end up doing really group. It's a huge transform to go to Fourier domain, but still a group in some sense. And then when you do Fourier, it's natural to ask, how about a wavelet? So that's how I end up with adaptive wavelet distillation. And the problem motivated was a cosmology project entry. And then we also did a cell biology project. So the agglomerative contextual decomposition, ACD, go beyond the gradient, intergradient for pixel to talk about importance of blocks of pixels. So this is a quick summary, like the gradient base is still, it's all embeds this sense of perturbation. Gradient is infinitesimal perturbation. And you can do bigger perturbation, occlusion, and sharp. And our method falls into the second category. I'll go very quickly because this is just to say that we started with sentiment analysis, pretty not scientific. And you want to give importance not just to not and good, but also not good. So this is a combination of features. And we were able to decompose deep learning in additive way to distribute all this prediction at different layers to the relevant bits and the irrelevant bits. So this is just to give you, we basically take the image decompose in two parts and trace how the relevant part interact with different parts and made it additive, and we have scores. And with the scores, it's pretty disorganized. So in this ACD paper, we made it organized. We're saying that, hey, you see that the reason not very good is negative. In the beginning, very good, all positive. It's the not, the last stage. So we merge these entities using the CD scores to make the biggest jump of the CD score, and we do hierarchical clustering. And we can do also for images. And we did 2 small human experiments to show that our method are favorable. And this, I think, can be followed up. And then we also feed back the ACD score. This is ICML paper to decrease. So human knows that your algorithm depends on gender, say for loan approval. And you can now put a penalty depends on score. With human embedded information, I want the dependence on gender to be low, and therefore remove some bias in the algorithm. Okay, so here's what I really want to talk about. So this is really a project, actually, Yelena was also part of this tripods. And toward the end of Francois, who also worked with Eurus, I started talking to him, oh, now you're leaving, so we should work together, right? Usually happens when people leave, you start working together. So most of the work I was done after Francois, and he brought in other people from the Cosmology Physics Center. And Usuk was also this tripod postdoc. And then Chandon has been working with Jamie on this interpret machine learning. So Jamie and Chandon did wonderful work, but it was not scientific. I always want to do something scientific. So I said, let's do something and see really our method works or not in this scientific problem. So this is simulation data and try to simulate from Big Bang. Boris can correct me, who now have cosmologists there, that this parameter lambda m is really the fraction of spaces that is occupied by some mass. And then you simulate with forward, and you see the map of mass in the universe, right? It's something called gravitational lens. And you want to inverse estimate. So you know the truth. And the simulation was done for different omegas and also other parameters. And deep learning worked the best in terms of recovering this omega m. Okay, that's what Francois' work. So we came in and say that, can we interpret your deep learning? And remember, we said the advantage of our method was we can look at importance, not just a single pixel, but blocks of pixels. And that can also generalize to, if you transform into Fourier space, we can also give importance. Because Fourier domain is very, very important for physicists and cosmologists. And so we start looking at the importance. The lower panel is the Fourier domain of the original image, which is simulated but supposed to be the data. And we look at the score for these different frequencies, and we see that around 0.3 seem to have the most importance. So this really indicate that this model, deep learning model, pay most attention to around frequency 0.3. And that made sense to cosmologists, and then the high frequencies matter less. Possibly they can take advantage of that in their simulation, so put less emphasis on the high frequency simulation. And this is just a toy example to compare with other interpretation methods. This is the simplest possible. You have one thresholded y, and you want to use a different interpretation to find it. And you can see that from the different runs, our CD give almost 100% accuracy, and the other, it's pretty good, but there's a drop of 4 or 5%. Okay, this is just a proof of concept. The validation really comes from the frequency interpretation we came out with was really coincided with the physicist or cosmologist intuition from physics. And then independently, I said, I used to work on wavelets 20 years ago. I said, let's do wavelets. I'm trying to really make deep learning interpretable. One thing is to make it more rigid than I'll call octopus, like kind of very, very flappy. And Francois actually already also independently talked to Chandon and Woosuk about using wavelets. Actually, I didn't know that there was already work using fixed wavelets to do this problem. So that's here. The relevance is the key, right? An interpretation model is relevant if it provides insight for a particular scientific audience into a chosen scientific problem. That's what I defined it. And scientific insight have to correspond to facts about the real world, and the information have to be valid. And wavelets are local transform. So it's interpretable scientists. It was the nurse rephrased one of them. We have to convince that person that wavelets are pretty interpretable. It's a different community. So here's the work. And you already heard Woosuk and Chandon, who also helped me greatly with the slides and the result I'll show you with the geometry. And Francois, and then Garko, the last person, is actually our apologist in the Advanced Bioimaging Center at Berkeley. We're working with him on a cell biology problem. So we took the method and used it for a completely different problem, also got really good results. Not just interpreted, I actually got better prediction results. So distillation started, actually there was an earlier paper I should reference by Rich Corona et al. Earlier than the Hinton paper. It's really, you have this complex black box model, deep learning. Can you distill to make it more interpretable? So people have been trying to use smaller, simpler deep learning model as a student, and the teacher is you use the fitted deep learning to give you data. So you have infinite amounts of data, and can you now summarize it in a smaller deep learning models? And people have also done using start with deep learning model and go to a soft decision tree. That's the Frest and Hinton, and also additive models, which use a lot of institutes. So you can take the fitted deep learning model with the advantage of all this computation advantage of stochastic gradient descent in high dimensional space, and take the surface and then kind of smooth version of your original data. And then you can try to fit it into a simpler model. And we chose wavelets because that's from Fourier transform to adaptive wavelets, it seems very natural to me and to Francois. So we set our goal to learn a wavelet transform. We want to improve interpretability, improve compression, and also prediction efficiency. So this is one page summary of what wavelet does. Time series is tiling the time and frequency domain vertically. And Fourier domain, Fourier transform is tiling the time and frequency space horizontally. And wavelets is tiling two together. So put different emphasis on different frequencies. High frequency, you have bigger intervals, and low frequency, you have finer intervals, because we think a lot of the structure are in low frequencies. And there are many great books, Mallet, 1989, Mayer, about 20 years or 25 years ago, that was really very nice research area from applied math statistics and signal processing. Many people were working on this. I even worked on it too myself. So here's what we end up doing. So we already have a pre-trained DNN for the cosmology with a model Francois trained with a 18-layer ResNet. So that's already given. We're not training anything. And that was just good enough for the problem, which simple enough. We didn't go to 150 layers. So that's already given to you. And what we did is, suppose you have a given wavelet transform phi or psi, then orthogonal wavelet transform is invertible. So you can just write X to wavelet transform and then take inversion and call X hat. And then you haven't done anything and you just put it into the wavelet. However, we block the psi inverse and the fitted deep learning into one function called that F. Okay, because we're going to learn psi now. Psi is now known. And we made up this or divide this new loss function. The first term is just reconstruction loss. We want psi and psi inverse more or less there. It's invertible, but if it's not, you still can have the interpretation. And the wavelet loss is to ensure that the psi comes from a mother wavelet with all the nice translation or dilation, both, right? If you know a mother wavelet, you know how to do the multi-level analysis. And the interpolation loss is the one uses the fitted deep learning and includes the psi inverse. And we didn't go to ICD because it's easier to use the gradient base with all the PyTorch, all the things. So we use the simpler component-wise interpretability. Okay, so the first term is very clear to you. The last term is pretty clear. It's just in the transform domain, you do this gradient stuff. And let me expand on the second term. So that's where Wusuk and Chen did a great job. I basically said, let's do wavelets, and Francois said, let's do wavelet. And they really went ahead and did wavelets. So you look at the books, if you have a mother wavelet, right, phi, it's an integral scalable scaling function. And you have all these conditions that this low pass and high pass filters need to satisfy. So we just took these equations, not 7.31, that's hard to turn into a numerical algorithm. The equations, we turn them into penalties. That's what enforce the wavelet property. And there are more, and we turn them into another penalty. And we collected most of them. And that's what we made, the wavelet loss function. And this is actually the same. If you think about people using deep learning to PDE, to solve PDE, in the beginning, I was like, well, how do you do that? And people have done that. Same idea, right? Have PDE, you put in the solution, suppose it's characterized by deep learning, just make the difference and do square and minimize that. So it's kind of enforcing the PDE. So it's actually, in hindsight, pretty smart, definitely. I didn't think of that one. I said, let's do wavelets. So Wusuk and Chandon did it. A lot of good ideas. In hindsight, it just seems obvious. Okay, so that's what we end up doing, right? We're just doing derivative because ACD is too complicated computationally to do. So this is just a simulation study, you can see that this is not a convex loss function. So if you start from something like a wavelets, a noise, it converges pretty well. But if you start random noise, you have to run the first two terms a little bit to get something close to wavelets. And then you can use the third term, and then things will converge. But if you don't do that, things can go wacky. And this is just show that we basically can recover the ground truth wavelets. Same Coif and dB. dB is W sheaves, right? Coifman. This is famous kind of conventional wavelet, Manners wavelets. Okay, back to the cosmology problem. Already in the literature, people already use fixed wavelet dB5, something Roberts cross is another kind of wavelets, and Laplace. And they also have this peak height that you use a wavelet, you count for the peaks and use the peak heights to do some multivariate Gaussian distribution. And because you simulate, you know the parameters and you see which one is close from the simulated, and therefore you recover the omega m. So our result, this is prediction error. Mean square error, basically 1.0. And ResNet is the closest, 1.1. If you use wavelets, different form, the best is 1.25. And if you use our loss function without the interpretation loss, that means without using the deep learning, you don't do as well. You get 1.3. So this says that deep learning is helping. And we even compare with the best ResNet, we have 10% improvement. So this is not just give you interpretation, but also improve prediction performance. So the original ResNet didn't have enough regularization or didn't have enough the right regularization. You need our call analytical match of your penalty of your method with the underlying structure. I think deep learning probably is not respecting, but the wavelets is respecting that. And the compression ratio we define that just look at all the coefficients larger than 10 minus 3. Why we take that? If you just chop everything off at 10 minus 3, you basically have reconstruction. We don't compress more, just a tiny bit. So here it's really saying that it's almost as sparse as dB5, but we get better prediction performance. So let's, this is just the peak counting method we just took from the literature, people using fixed wavelets. And this is because, remember, I have two penalties, one wavelet, one interpretation, and this is to see that there's a trade-off, right? We end up hitting here. And so this is a symmetric one, not asymmetric one. And this is kind of correspond to different symmetric region space with large densities and surrounding content information about predicting. So this is the reason this is capture some structure in the data that's good for predicting omega m. And the reconstruction loss is like 0.089 and the wavelet 0.015. So you can see the construction loss still dominate the wavelet loss. So this is a geometry part. This is a geometry workshop. I didn't have sampling, but this is not in the paper. So the adaptive wavelets just got accepted in NERSP. And this is the low pass coefficients. And you can see that pretty much we close to dB5, W is 5. But for the first detail, low and high pass, you can see the eigenvalue definitely lower for the adaptive wavelets. Things become more sparse. If you look at the scatter plot, the PC directions, even we try to do transparency, you do see the blues are more on the outside. That means it's kind of sparsified, right? There's more big ones. The energy got concentrated in more in the adaptive wavelet to make it bigger. And the last two kind of comparable. UMAP is something I don't fully understand, but biologists love it. It's very popular. So we have a project to understand what it really does. This is really try to keep some similarities. And it doesn't keep global structure, this UMAP. And you definitely see differences. We haven't done that, but it's like, are these differences we see visually in UMAP? Is that responsible to the prediction performance. That to be investigated. And then if you just take a random selected image and you just look at the coefficients, and you can see that it seems like a depth wavelet push more things to 0 because see this little blue got higher and also higher, and push also the big one. So it's really specification. Here you see a big 0 again, big more 0, but not pushing. But first one you can see it's pushed more big ones. So that's what you want, right? You want more zeros and more big ones. And this is a comparison for another selected for random selected image across different levels. And you can see overall that the subbands that you do have more zeros appearing. This is another select one.
So can I have a question?
Yeah.
So what does LIFO mean in this?
What?
What does LIFO mean?
So, level. So usually you have mother wavelet. This is like low pass. This is low, high, high, low, high, high.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's how we tile. We did 5 level, but the last level is we didn't really look at it. It's a lot of noise.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's what it is. Thank you for the question. And if you look at the peak count, so we do another feature extraction using the peak count that came from cosmology. You definitely see a big difference between the adaptive wavelets and dB5. I'll conjecture this is probably responsible for the improved performance, but we need to do more investigation. This just came this morning. So we are in the middle of doing this. So that you can see a huge difference because the peak count is already used in cosmology. It's a good method based on fixed wavelets. And if you do adaptive wavelets, you really see the difference. So that I conjecture this is the reason why we do better prediction. They're both pretty concentrated, you can see, but in different ways. And the eigenvalue, you cannot really tell. This is not really Gaussian data, right? So that's why the eigenvalues are limited. Okay, so that's what we did with cosmology. I always like to cross-validate or external validation our methodology, even we solve one problem to a completely different problem. So we're working with GARCO already for a couple of years for a very different problem called molecular partner problem. So this is really cool biology, which I didn't know until I got on the project. I always thought the cells, things get into cells through ion channels. That's one way. Actually, there's something else called clathrin-mediated endocytosis. So this is the cell membranes. A lot of the food is got into the cell through this process. So the cargo from outside gather, and there's little guys, molecules start lining up inside and create a pit. And then there's something called scission proteins, cut it, you get things in. So it's really cool. And it's a key process in vesicular trafficking that transport a wide range of cargo molecule from cell surface to the interior. But this process doesn't always complete. Sometimes the cut doesn't happen, so it didn't happen. So for cell biologists, it's very important to know when they call this endocytosis is completed. And this is one of the important molecular partner problem because my molecules work together. So the biologists want to know who work with what. So clustering is easier to observe. It needs it, but clustering is not enough to ensure that the cargo gets transported. There's something called oxalin, it's the green stuff, that is more indication that the cargo got inside the cell. But it's harder to observe. Therefore, the prediction, can we use clustering to predict the oxalin and to predict basically whether the event is completed. And the original data is video. This is kind of nanoscale. And because this is already inside, like the smaller than the size of the cell. But directly using deep learning on this audio, we couldn't make it work. So we have to use a lot of knowledge about electronic microscopy to track this like flashes of important signals and make a time series, and then we use LSTM. So the video, we couldn't make it work. And the problem, the best method I know about deep learning and video still using, video as static images. So it's not the best way to do it. Okay, so in the beginning, we did a lot of hand-tuned features because we didn't have enough data. Eventually, I had a lot of data. We end up using LSTM. It's kind of recurrent network with time series. And use exactly the same method. We distill that into such wavelets. And then we use 5 scales, 6 largest coefficients. And we did a linear prediction of the magnitude of oscillation. So that's why R squared want to be large. It's a proportion variance that's explained by the model. This is a continuous problem. Again, AWE did better, much better than wavelets. That's the best wavelets. 0.2, this is 0.26. The bigger, the better here. So this is only explained 20%. This is 26%. LSTM is like 24%. So we did a little better. And if you don't use the interpretation loss, that means you don't use the LSTM, you have about, how to say, 10% something drop. So it's really kind of combining the wavelets with LSTM through the interpretation loss really gave the gain. We both have the interpretation and also the predictive accuracy increase. And for this, if you cut at 10.3 again, AWE makes things definitely a lot sparser, from 70% to 57%. So this means it's a better fit, almost like, for this problem in terms of compression. And this is just the same plot, right? So this is asymmetric, really capture what we know already by staring at a lot of images. You need a high jump and a drop. That's a very good indication of a complete or successful event. If you see this rise and jump and drop of clustering, that's a good indication that the event will be complete. So here we have better reconstruction loss. Before it was like 0.8, 9, this is 0.02. And wavelet loss, it's even better. So that means we really got very close to a real wavelets. So the same plot, right? Again, the second low pass, high pass, you see a drop of eigenvalues. And you can see that, again, the blue ones are outside. That means more energy got packed into the high coefficient under the adaptive wavelets than the original one. And remember the other one, the cosmology is like a Gaussian. This is definitely have shapes. And this is let's see. And this is kind of approximate 1, 2, 1, 2, yeah. Oh, this is, sorry, yeah, this is 1, 2. Now we look at 1, 3. So look a little deeper into the coefficient. You still see that very different shapes. So they're different. And mostly the blue ones seem to be on the outskirts. That means energy packing is better. This is the same U map. I don't fully understand what it does because it's very nonlinear, but still you see a very, so next step we need to do is to label this to see whether a lot of this is from different images, whether this is from one class, that's from the other. But again, you see a big difference in this low pass coefficients. Oh no, sorry, this is not low pass. This is just U map, which it's good to visualize, but we have to correspond, map that back to something we can trust. And this is a randomly selected time series, right? Remember, we extracted from video a time series for clustering. And this is much, much more clear than the cosmology plot that you packed energy to the big coefficients and you put more into 0. Much, much more clear than the first one. And we also have bigger increase, and similarly here. At all levels, we seem to see the blue more outskirts and low more zeros. So this packing is a lot more efficient. And we see that also in the compression ratio. This is the same thing. You see the packing and some that ask the mole. This is for another random selected point. Okay, what do I have time? Okay, great. So what I have done is that we define a general framework to define interval machine learning, predictability, descriptive accuracy, and also relevance. So we want to know for what and for whom, and with reality check through predictive accuracy. And we organize these scores for importance, not just for individual features, but also for groups of features and in a hierarchical way as ACD. And this AWD is very much a collaboration with scientists, right? So it was not developed in isolation. After we did the wavelets, we went back to a lot of methods already, especially for the cosmology. People already use fixed wavelets for peak counting. We just change one step and we use deep learning. So it's very much, I'll say, integrated with the scientific methods, not just we do this and you apply. And all the papers, we had a review paper, somebody was organizing a book on interval machine learning or explainable AI. And all the papers, if you want one paper, that's a good paper to look at, but we don't have the plots because this is just done the last couple of days. So looking into the future, as I said, we need to relate the geometry, the different clusters back to the prediction performance. Is that explained by this different clustering behavior? And we're nice to go beyond one layer. I think a lot of problems, one layer might be enough. There's a lot of scientific physical science problems. And Malay's group already been pushing scatter and transform, and we can definitely do adaptive wavelet in that framework. But we also think that probably you need to go beyond wavelets for higher levels. They're not really edge detections. Can we really bring closer to deep learning? And also the PD I mentioned earlier, that's also of interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the great talk. Let's take questions. We have enough time to.
It's kind of beyond. It's not really related, but it's related to this idea of working with scientists that I'm curious, because I know you've done a lot of that. So in physics, right, they propose models, theoretical models, and they do experiments. And if the experiment doesn't correspond to the model, then I guess you're supposed to tweak the model, and so forth. It's like your model is incorrect, or maybe you try to repeat the experiment, again and again. It's quite expensive and all that. So I'm curious if this idea of correlation between model and experiments has been considered. So in other words, a model may not be perfect. Is there some way to measure how good it is, or to talk about a measure of how good it is? I mean, it's very much against, I guess, the physics spirit, where you find the right model. But I'm not even sure that you ever do, because it's all still another experiment.
You mean like from the model output, how do we go back to experiments?
That's right. So
so that's a great question. So in my genomics work, we definitely do that. So what we do, we're working with cardiologists through the BioHealth project with Ashley's group from Stanford. So we use iterative random forest to find gene-gene interactions, and we look at annotated databases, and they do experiments. Mm-hmm. So they will knock up genes and to see whether our predictions actually mean that they're responsible for some heart disease.
Do you change your model then, depending on the experiments, or do you just say?
Yeah, you're really saying that, how do we take that back into account? Okay. I think it should be done. We haven't done that because we're still helping them to analyze the results. Mm-hmm. And the previous collaboration we had with Sue Seneca's lab for another Drosophila project, we find the important gene because it's lethal, but our computation predictions were not right. So we don't even know how to bring it back. The hope was we did 40 experiments there, and we find one important gene because the embryo dies at 16th hour. But our quantitative prediction said that that's related to this very famous gap gene network. We don't believe it. But we did find something. So there's this science is like, if you find something, it's good enough, but whether you can bring it back really depends. I'm hoping that with the cardiologists, we'll have better chance to bring that back to our model, but we haven't done that. That's what we hope we'll be able to do, but it's a great future direction. And people do a lot of knockout experiment with the yeast and things like that, right? I think they might have a better chance because it's very quick. Here it's very expensive. We only can knock out one gene. And there's also a problem in general about this knockout experiment. It's like, are you creating a state nature never sees? Because when you just so abruptly knock something out, would you ever see that if nature just progresses by itself? So that's a pretty fundamental problem about all these knockout experiments. So we'll hope to integrate it back. For example, maybe we can eliminate some interactions we found. We can definitely eliminate maybe some genes to reduce the search. The ideal I was envisioning was really we work with the experiment together, not just in a very staged fashion, but more integrated. But so we talked to the experimenters a lot, but right now we're just struggling with analyzing the knockout experiments. So eventually it would be great we do that, but I don't know what analytical form would take. It's a long answer to a.
Thank you for the answer. And actually, I have a question. Oh, okay, yeah. So maybe I can go first. So because according to our experiments, it looks like the coefficient for the adaptive wavelet tend to be more sparse.
Yeah.
Than the coefficient of the DB5.
Yeah.
The best handcrafted.
Yeah.
I wonder, do you have any comment on why the learned coefficient for A.D is more sparse?
Well, we use L1, right, in the interpretability. I should have mentioned that. Thank you for the question. We use L1 in the interpretation loss. If we use L2, I don't think you'll have it.
Okay.
Because in the spirit, because wavelets to get sparsity, right, you know, like for compression.
I see.
So we did L1.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, that's why.
Okay.
We definitely encourage that. But a nice surprise that we also did better with prediction. So that means there's a matching. Yes.
So I have some extremely vague confusion, but I have hope that maybe you could help me in some way with this. So on the one hand, I really like the perspective.
Can you speak a little louder?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I really like the perspective on interpretability. It says sort of interpretable for whom,
yeah.
Right? That saying that the algorithm is interpretable to cosmologists is different than for the lay public and so on, right? On the other hand, my sense is a lot of the excitement around successful methods in machine learning, something like random forests, is their extreme agnosticism, right? That you can somehow throw a random forest at a data set where you don't know what the data set is about at all, and it will just find patterns, right? So I guess I am wondering if you were trying to bring interpretability to methods like random forest and deep learning that are somehow supposed to not be about anything specific, if the interpretability, does that require essentially abandoning these hyper general methods that sort of don't care what domain of application is
involved? I think
or?
the deep learning as shown, right? I think there's a tension between the two, but I think both are needed. Because if I remove the interpretation loss, which is used to deep learning, my prediction accuracy actually decreases. So there's a need to use this powerful machinery that you can search very efficiently and follow the pattern in the data to go to a good place, and then you kind of shrink back.
I see.
So I'm definitely, for genomics, actually the decision tree have a lot of biological backing because thresholding behavior.
Oh, interesting.
So it's already kind of matching there, but random forest is used for housing price prediction, a lot of other things. So I think that's our call off the shelf. And you can also have this off the shelf kind of interpret method. That's what I said, like you want in general decision trees, people are happy. So just you basically define your audience as a general.
I see.
So you can also put it under my relevance kind of a banner saying that you have a very big audience and people agree on decision tree. It's pretty interpretable for a wide range of people. But if you want to do something more scientific, I think this Fourier stuff is probably, I don't think people like cosmology, I don't know, go for decision trees. Yeah, so you can do both. And sometimes you can make everybody happy with decision trees, but sometimes you can only make a small subset happy.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
So any other question? Okay, so if no more question, let's thank Bing again for the
Thank
so
you.
enlightening talk. So this is the end of our morning section.